It was barely sunset when the explosion tore through the hull. 1 second, passengers aboard the Athenia were sitting down to dinner, listening to the low hum of the engines, the polite clink of silverware, the soft shuffle of the ocean beneath them. And the next, a deafening roar, steel rupturing, water gushing in, lights flickering, screams. No one knew what had hit them. Not at first. Some thought it might be the boilers, a mechanical failure, but then they saw the lifeboats being lowered, the panic on the crew's faces, the tilt of the deck beneath their feet, and for those still standing on the upper decks, they saw it, just for a second, a dark silhouette cutting through the waves. Low, long, deadly, a German submarine. The RMS Athenia wasn't a warship, it wasn't carrying soldiers, it wasn't armed, it was a passenger liner. And when it left Glasgow on September 1st, 1939, it carried 1,103 civilians, men, women, children, some British, many American, a few refugees. It was headed for Canada, for safety, for peace. But peace was already gone, because just hours after the ship left port, Germany invaded Poland, and Britain, by the morning of September 3rd, had declared war. By nightfall that same day, the Athenia would be sinking in the Atlantic. Victim of the first British ship attack of World War II, the Athenia was built in 1922 by the Anchor Donaldson Line. It was the kind of ship built for long hauls, sturdy, reliable, less luxurious than the great transatlantic liners, but comfortable. By the late 1930s, she was a regular on the route between Glasgow and Montreal, often carrying emigrants, tourists, and seasonal workers. She wasn't fast. Her top speed barely reached 15 knots. But she was trusted. A symbol of normal life, crossing a world that felt increasingly unsteady. And on September 1st, 1939, the day Germany invaded Poland, she departed Glasgow like she always had, headed west across the North Atlantic. No one aboard could have known how short the journey would be. The passengers on board came from all walks of life. British families fleeing what they feared would be another great war. Americans heading home from European vacations. Jewish refugees, quiet, hopeful, carrying small bags and heavy memories. Some had heard the news about Poland. Some dismissed it as yet another European skirmish. Most still hoped it would blow over. After all, hadn't there been crises before? The Rhineland, Austria, Czechoslovakia, Britain and France had backed down then. Surely they'd find a way to do it again. But by the morning of September 3rd, the illusion was shattered. Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain announced on national radio, Britain was at war with Germany. On board the Athenia, there was confusion, then tension. Was the ship now a target? Would the route change? Could they turn back? But the captain, James Cook, not to be confused with the 18th century explorer, kept calm. He knew the rules of the sea. Passenger ships were protected under international law. They weren't military assets. They didn't carry guns. And besides, the Athenia was moving in a zigzag pattern, standard practice in wartime to avoid submarine detection. Everything, he believed, would be fine. But Captain Cook didn't know what lurked beneath the surface. The German U-boat that spotted the Athenia that day was U-30, commanded by Kapitänleutnant Fritz Julius Lemp. He was young, just 26 years old, and ambitious. Lemp had been patrolling the waters west of Scotland when he saw the silhouette of a ship on the horizon. Through his periscope, he studied it. Big, fast-moving, keeping to a zigzag course. To Lemp, that meant one thing, a troop transport, a warship in disguise. He made a fateful decision, one he wasn't authorized to make, one that would haunt Germany's propaganda machine for years. At 7:38 p.m., U-30 fired a torpedo. It struck the Athenia near the engine room. The blast ripped through steel, sending water and fire surging into the lower compartments. On board, Chaos reigned. In the dining hall, tables were flung. Glass shattered. People were thrown against walls. In the corridors, lights flickered and died. The ship lurched. Passengers stumbled through smoke and water, trying to reach the deck. The crew acted quickly. They began lowering lifeboats, sending SOS messages, organizing passengers. But lifeboats were tricky. Some were damaged. One flipped, throwing women and children into the sea. There were heroes, crew members who gave up their own life jackets, who dove into the water to rescue strangers. And there were moments of grace. A pianist who kept playing to calm the children. A steward who stayed behind to search cabins for the elderly. Within minutes, the Athenia was listing hard to port. Water rushed in faster than the pumps could handle. The engines died, and the ship was drifting. Help would eventually come. A Norwegian freighter, the Knut Nelson, was first on the scene, rescuing dozens. Then a Swedish yacht, the Southern Cross, arrived, followed by a Canadian destroyer, the HMCS Saint Laurent. Together, they pulled hundreds from the sea, exhausted, shivering. Alive, but not everyone made it. Out of the 1,103 passengers and 315 crew, 117 people died. Most were women and children. Among the dead were 28 Americans, and that created a crisis. You see, Germany hadn't meant to provoke the United States. Not yet. The Nazi regime had strict orders not to attack American vessels or kill American citizens. They wanted to avoid drawing the U.S. into the war, at least early on. But with Americans now among the dead from a German torpedo, everything changed. At first, Berlin denied involvement. German radio blamed the British, suggesting they had deliberately sunk the Athenia to frame Germany. An outrageous lie. For weeks, the Nazi regime stuck to that story, even publishing articles in American newspapers to muddy the waters. But in private, they knew the truth. Lemp had made a mistake. He hadn't identified the ship correctly, and by the time he realized it was a passenger liner, it was too late. Hitler was furious, not at the loss of life, but at the diplomatic mess. He ordered all German U-boat captains to never again attack passenger ships without direct authorization. But the damage was done. For the survivors, the trauma would never fade. Many spoke of the eerie calm before the explosion. The sound of the sea turning from gentle rhythm to roaring chaos. The screams in the dark. The cries for help that went unanswered. Some were haunted by the faces they saw just before the lifeboats lowered. Others by the bodies they couldn't save. The children who lost parents. The mothers who lost children. One girl, barely 9 years old, had been standing next to her sister when the torpedo hit. By the time she reached a lifeboat, her sister was gone. She would speak of that night decades later, her voice trembling, still searching the waves in her mind. The Athenia would not be the last ship sunk in World War II. Far from it, but it was the first. The opening salvo in what would become the Battle of the Atlantic, years of submarine warfare, convoys, and countless losses. But unlike so many wartime sinkings, this one happened to civilians, to innocents, to people who believed, just maybe, that the ocean would carry them to safety. Instead, it became their grave, and history nearly forgot them. The Athenia lies somewhere in the North Atlantic. Its exact resting place is still undiscovered, a ghost beneath the waves. But the story it tells is loud. It speaks of the price of misjudgment, of the fragility of life at sea, of how fast the world can change. It was only hours after the war began, and already people were dying. Thank you for listening to the Sunken Ledger. Subscribe for more true stories from the depths.